Look, I think the summit, and there's a lot of criticism towards the Australian government, and I do want to commend them on the work that they've done in bringing this together. But it doesn't forsake that some of the criticism sits there around what does global nature positive actually mean? Like being able to, on one hand, say that we're addressing the intricate and massive issues that we have to deal with around this space. Are we actually in positive doing that? Or are we starting from a deficit? So I like to be always sort of the half glass full and say that we're dealing with positives. But there's always sort of that doubt in the back of anyone's mind.
Welcome to the Mongabay Newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo. Bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet, and holding people in power to account. This podcast is edited on Gadigal land. Today on the newscast, I take you inside the world's first Global Nature Positive Summit, which was hosted in Sydney, Australia at the ICC Theatre. Led by the Australian government, the summit brought together leaders, experts, scientists, and NGOs from around the world to discuss biodiversity protection, meeting the goals outlined in the Global Biodiversity Framework that were agreed to at COP15 in Montreal, private investment, and other market-based instruments such as carbon or biodiversity credits. In this episode, I interview two delegates to the convention, as well as a conservation scientist, for their take on how the summit went, how they feel about the state of biodiversity, the 30 by 30 goals outlined in Kunming, Montreal, Australia's track record with environmental protection, and what kind of action they want to see now. Australia's Minister of Environment and Water, Tanya Plibersek, stated back in 2022 that there, quote, wasn't another minute to waste to reform Australia's environmental laws, which many experts, including the minister herself, have said are broken. But nearly 2 years on, reforms to the EPBC Act, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, have not come to pass. And while the minister announced that Australia would be expanding its marine protected areas by over 300,000 square kilometers and thus protecting over 52% of its ocean, experts have told The Guardian that figure is misleading. Now, when the minister first released her nature positive plan in December of 2022, she set a target of 0 extinctions and a stronger emissions reduction target with a clear path to net zero, among many other aspirations. Yet, that same month, Australia had 116 new coal, oil, and gas projects planned. And she approved 3 coal mine extensions just last month. And 400 kilometers from Sydney in New South Wales, the Forestry Corporation is commencing logging in a habitat for some of the most endangered and iconic marsupials on the continent, the greater glider and koala. Many of these actions from the Labour government and the minister have been characterized as hypocrisy, as reported on in The Guardian. As a journalist attending the summit, I looked for any kind of acknowledgement or comment from the government on these conflicting actions and how they're being perceived by the public. But I did not see any. I reached out to the minister 2 weeks in advance of the summit to get her comment, but was not granted an interview. The people I did interview for this podcast, however, provided their insight, knowledge, and recommendations about what it means to take action and make good on conservation promises for the people that steward the land and the environment. First, I interviewed Barry Hunter, a descendant of the Djabugay people and CEO of the Indigenous-led nonprofit, the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance. He spoke in the opening plenary and mentioned that what really needs to happen is action. So Barry gave me his thoughts on what taking action looks like, specifically to honor the aspirations of Indigenous and First Nations people in Australia.
Barry Hunter, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance.
And you mentioned in the panel that you spoke in that the biggest takeaway for you is that it's time for action. So what does this action look like?
Anywhere in Australia, particularly across the north that I know of, there are Indigenous land and sea ranges who are actively on country doing work that we speak of in terms of, in broader sense, at forums such as this, So that's really sort of the tire hitting the road. There's real stuff happening there. So it's around being able to ensure that those sort of things can continue, and the real biodiversity values that we see on country and nature, that we see on country, and that on country term, refers to the broader environment where people are connected, because country isn't really anything without people connection to it and interacting and sometimes we do harmful things to it, but sometimes we try and assist nature in repairing and that incredible work. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about, that there's real things happening in real time, and it's being able to continually support those with real investments. And we hear sort of figures around 200 billion that's required annually to address global biodiversity decline. So how do we maneuver those aspects and that resource to get real action on the ground? And that's what I'm really advocating for and pushing for. We've got that many frameworks, we've got that many plans, we've got a whole lot of different strategies that speak to action, but none of them are as good unless people are out there actually doing the work.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in to listen to the first few minutes of this podcast. To hear the full conversation, find the Mongabay newscast wherever you get your podcasts from and click subscribe. You can also get each new episode straight to your inbox by subscribing to Mongabay's weekly newsletter at mongabay.com. And if you really want to support us, you can donate to our Patreon at patreon.com/Mongabay. Thanks for listening.